There's a moment when something inside you tightens, not sharply, just enough to notice. It happens in the middle of an ordinary pause, between words, between breaths. Nothing has gone wrong. No argument, no clear disappointment. And yet your body reacts as if it's bracing for something, as if it's already tired. You don't know why. You just feel heavier than you were a minute ago. You stay still. You keep listening. You keep holding the space. That's familiar. But that's not the part most people notice. What's easier to see is the way you remain calm, the way you soften your tone, the way you give more room than you take. From the outside, it looks like patience, like depth, like strength. Inside, something else is happening. There's a quiet calculation, not deliberate, almost automatic. You're sensing where the edges are. What can be said? What should be held back? You adjust before anyone asks you to. You often do. It doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like gravity. And that's where it starts to change. Not in the moment when someone crosses a line, but in the moment when you move yours. You don't call it that. You don't even notice it right away. You just feel a slight drift. A subtle step inward. You become smaller in the room, quieter in your own chest, still present, still kind, still aware, but a little further from yourself. Most people would say this is empathy. They'd say it's sensitivity. They'd say it's care. And on the surface it is. But there's something quieter happening underneath. A slow rearranging. It begins early usually, long before you have words for it. You learn that moods can change without warning. That silence can mean many things. That harmony matters. You learn to feel before you think, to sense before you speak. You learn that it's safer to notice first, to adapt quickly, to smooth the air. None of this feels dramatic. It feels normal. You don't feel like you're giving something up. You feel like you're doing what needs to be done. And because nothing explodes, it seems to work. But over time, something accumulates. Not resentment, not anger. Weight, a kind of emotional density that sits behind your ribs. You feel it when you're alone, when the room is quiet, when there's no one to read. It's the tiredness that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from holding too much. But that's not the part most people notice either. What they notice is that you're dependable, that you understand, that you don't make things worse. They notice how you stay. When others leave, how you listen without interrupting. How you sense what's needed before it's asked for. They don't see the trade. They don't see the moments when you pause before saying something true. Not because it's unkind, but because it might shift the balance. They don't see how often you swallow words that never come back. And that's where the line begins to appear. Not as a boundary, as a feeling, a faint internal signal. You notice that certain conversations leave you drained in a way that sleep doesn't fix. That certain people feel heavier over time, not lighter. You still care, but you don't feel replenished by caring anymore. You start to feel distant while being close, present while pulling back. It's confusing because nothing has changed on the surface. You're still showing up, still listening, still being the one who understands, but something inside you is watching now, watching the cost. You may not trust that feeling at first. You may push it aside. You tell yourself it's normal, that everyone gets tired, that this is just part of connection. But the feeling doesn't go away. It waits. It shows up in small hesitations, in longer pauses before replying, in the way your body stiffens just a little when someone needs something again. You don't feel angry. You feel protective of something you haven't fully named yet. And that's where it starts to matter, because there is a difference between understanding others and disappearing inside that understanding. There is a line between sensing someone's emotional state and reorganizing yourself around it. Most people never see that line. They don't have to, but you feel it. You feel it when your first instinct is to manage the atmosphere instead of checking how you are. When your attention moves outward before it moves inward. You feel it when your own feelings become vague, distant, harder to access, not because they're gone, but because they've been postponed too many times. Still, you don't name it yet, you keep going, because stopping would mean questioning something that once kept you safe. Something that earned you connection, something that felt like love. But halfway through this pattern, something shifts. quietly. You realize that the exhaustion isn't coming from other people's emotions. It's coming from the moment you take responsibility for them. Not responsibility as control. Responsibility as weight. The moment you decide without thinking that it's on you to keep things steady, that it's on you to prevent discomfort, that it's on you to absorb what others can't hold. That's the line. And it's not crossed all at once. It's crossed in small, invisible steps. Each time you silence an inner response to preserve peace. Each time you translate yourself into something easier to receive. Each time you stay attuned to others while disconnecting from your own center. You don't lose yourself dramatically. You diffuse. And one day you notice that being deeply seen feels unfamiliar, almost unsettling, because you're used to being the one who sees. You're used to adjusting, not being met, to understanding, not being understood. And that's when the awareness settles in. The care you give so freely has been moving in one direction, outward. And somewhere along the way, you stop being on the receiving end of your own attention. This isn't a flaw, it's an adaptation. It formed for a reason. But adaptations have limits when they're used beyond what they were meant for. They begin to erode something essential. You start to sense that certain connections rely on your silence, on your flexibility, on your willingness to carry what isn't yours. And the realization doesn't come with anger. It comes with grief, a quiet grief for how natural it felt to step aside, for how long you thought that was closeness. This is the emotional line that changes everything, not because you suddenly stop caring, but because you notice where your care has been placed. You notice that empathy without self-presence becomes self-erasure. That awareness without limits becomes depletion. You notice that you've been meeting others with your full attention while meeting yourself halfway. And once that's seen, it can't be unseen. The world doesn't change immediately. People don't behave differently overnight, but your inner orientation shifts. You pause longer before responding. Not to withdraw, but to check in. You begin to feel the difference between resonance and responsibility, between compassion and self-abandonment. You still sense deeply, you still understand, but you no longer disappear in the process. The line doesn't harden, it clarifies. It becomes less about protection and more about presence. You realize that holding space doesn't require you to empty yourself. That understanding someone doesn't mean carrying their emotional weight. This awareness doesn't make you louder. It makes you steadier. You stop leaning forward so much. You stop reaching before you're asked. You allow moments of silence to exist without fixing them. And in those moments, something returns. A subtle sense of solidity, of being inside your own body again. The exhaustion softens, not because life is easier, but because you're no longer dividing yourself. At the end of it, there's no grand conclusion, just a quieter way of being. A way where your sensitivity is no longer a burden you manage, but a capacity you inhabit. Where connection feels mutual again, not because others changed, but because you stopped crossing the line that asked you to leave yourself behind. And in that space, there's relief. Not the kind that announces itself. The kind that feels like finally standing on solid ground without having to explain why.